Wisconsin falls 24-10 at Michigan, suffering its third consecutive loss on the season and seventh overall in Big Ten play going back to last season. I didn't hate Saturday's loss. Listen, I know everyone is sick and tired of losing, and I'm certainly not trying to put lipstick on a pig here or carry water for the program. I know we're way past moral victories at this point, but sometimes you're just looking for signs, and I think we saw some on Saturday. I'm at a point where I fully hit the reset button on this program. So, when people get upset about, kind of what I wrote and, maybe it was so positive in a loss, I've moved on from, where we were 5 to 7 years ago. I think we don't live in that world anymore. Like I said, I fully hit the reset button back to the pre-Alvarez era. I'm looking for baby steps, signs to go back, that pushes this thing back forward. And with the way Wisconsin played against Maryland 2 weeks ago, with the way they looked at Alabama the week before that, where they didn't belong on the same field, I feel differently based on what we saw against Michigan in a game where I fully expected them to get run over. I predicted 34-3 Michigan. I thought the Wolverines would pound the rock, eat up the time of possession, just run through Wisconsin. That they got a great defense that's known for causing havoc. They're one of the best in the country at takeaways, sacks, tackles for loss. The two things I thought Wisconsin needed to do that were at the top of my list. Get that offensive line going to protect Hunter Simmons at quarterback and limit some of those havoc plays that Michigan can cause. And they needed their run defense to show up and prove it was for real. They did those two things. Michigan finishes with 175 yards. They came into that game averaging close to 260 on the ground, and Michigan kind of padded their stats a little late too. I don't know if you feel differently, but I'm coming out of that game feeling okay. I can handle that type of loss. I can live with that type of loss.
I agree with you. I mean, you want to be able to win these games, right? Obviously, and you want to play at the highest level, compete at the highest level with your success and with your wins. But I will say, I mean, I think there was a lot of positives from this performance. I think from a fan standpoint, we wanted to see at least a belief, right, that we could win the game, and I believe
Yeah.
that we could win that game at some point, right? But there were just a few things that we just couldn't take advantage of, or a few things that we needed to kind of take that next step in order to, make that a little bit more of a competitive game, and we couldn't get that done. But they competed their tails off. I mean, I think the guys played extremely hard, and they gave themselves a fighting chance. And when you see how the season has gone so far, I think that's what we at least wanted, right? And what we wanted to see going into this tough part of the season of what people were expecting. So I think there's a lot of positives to look at this game, and a lot to be proud of if you're in that locker room trying to scratch and claw your way into something positive this season.
Right. And again, I know it's an extremely low bar that I'm setting here. Just don't get run over what was kind of the bar that I had. And, for 2.5 quarters, that game was pretty much even with one of the best teams in the Big Ten. Now, I think they caught Michigan on a good day. I also don't think Michigan took them that seriously. And a lot of that was just kind of the atmosphere. I didn't feel like it was a really hostile environment. Now, they were packed to the rim at that place, but it never really got overly loud. Now, part of that's probably just the game flow in general. It was a real grinder. There wasn't a ton to cheer about from either side. But again, where this thing was 2 weeks ago, where you were embarrassed at home against Maryland, getting down 20-0, and just how the season has gone in general. I don't want to say they couldn't have won that game because, like I said, I think for 2.5 quarters there, it was there for the taking. But, in all reality, you weren't going to wake up one day and just, after what happened 2 weeks ago against Maryland, and then beat a team like Michigan in the big house, right? I mean, the chances of that happening based on the team we now know Wisconsin has were slim to none. It just felt like Wisconsin got beat by a better team who didn't kill themselves on that day.
Right. I think they did a great job. Wisconsin and Hunter Simmons did a great job controlling the game, right? They didn't go out of their elements to make a big play until probably close to the middle of the second half, which, was arguably a defense pass interference when we were trying to make a big
Right.
play. Um, but being able to control the game and being able to take care of the football in games like this when you're kind of on paper outmatched, right? And you're trying to figure out a way to win the game with what you have. I mean, we're on our third quarterback. We got a lot of injuries on the O line, a lot of adversity in some certain ways like that on paper. So being able to control the game and take care of the ball was, very vital. And they did a great job of that. And then we eventually had to make a big play, right? I mean, we weren't really pushing the ball downfield, and having to do that, you do take risks. And we didn't get that part done, which is kind of that next step in order to stay in these ball games.
And I had that written down to talk about later, but at least we're not talking about pride, effort, all the stuff we've been talking about the last couple weeks. Now you can see Wisconsin controlled the controllables, right? I mean, gave up one sack to a really good front seven in Michigan. Again, they were one of the best in the country. I think they were sacking opponents on 10% of their dropbacks. They got to Hunter Simmons once. Wisconsin, 5 penalties, 35 yards. You'd like to see that a little bit lower, but there really wasn't one detrimental penalty. I mean, the biggest one came, I think, on that first drive where Michigan drew a pass interference, and that was a drive. You could tell they were scoring anyway. The way they were moving that football, they were a little desperate there, down 7-0. They were getting in that end zone, hell or high water anyway. But again, you didn't kill yourself and step on your own foot if you're Wisconsin, which again, I know it's a low bar, but it's progress. And then your offensive line was a mess. I thought I was trying to watch Davis Heinzen as much as I could. There were a couple snaps there that were a little low, a little wobbly. There's somewhere he puts too much air under him. But for a guy that hasn't played center at this level, I thought he might have found a home there. Now we'll see what happens when Jake Renfro comes back. Where he's going to move, or if Wisconsin ever needs him again at all. But along with him, and you're down to a third-string quarterback, you were dealing with some stuff on Saturday, and what's typically one of the tougher places to play in the country. But again, I thought that was one of my bigger takeaways is for the first time in a while, I'm not talking about self-inflicted wounds. I'm not questioning this team's, pride. I was down on the sidelines, looking at their response to everything Michigan did. I didn't see Wisconsin flinch, get rattled. I thought they had great energy and focus throughout the game. To me, that this wasn't a team that's quit on Luke Fickell.
And that's very positive, right? Going into what, especially Iowa next week, and going into what else that they have throughout the rest of the year. You want to see that, right? You want to see that fight. You want to see these kids believing that they can win these big ball games, because that's all you got left for the rest of the season is nothing but big ball games. So I really enjoyed the competition side of things. And Luke Fickell said this in his press about competitive spirit. We need more
Yep.
guys like that. I saw a lot of that on the field. These guys are competing their tails off trying to find a way to win the ball game. So I don't know. I mean, I think that there's obviously steps in order to be able to be one of those teams that beats Michigan again, that competes with these top 10 teams again. But you need those steps in the right direction, and I think they had a good game plan altogether. I think the defense exposed their Michigan's offensive line a number of times. The defense fought their tails off. I mean, it kind of reminded me of 2021, where they eventually just got worn down as the game went on.
Yeah.
But the score just didn't really reflect how much Michigan had to earn, in my opinion. So, I think that there should be a lot of positives going into what next week entails for Wisconsin. And I think fans should be looking forward to what's the next step in this team getting better.
You make a good point because the last two losses, I didn't feel like Alabama and Maryland really had to earn them. I think I said something along the lines after the Alabama game. Everything Alabama did felt more embarrassing for Wisconsin than it did like Oh, Alabama just made a good play, and I think Maryland was kind of along the same lines. If I do have one big criticism from this game, it's that my feeling was that Wisconsin played to keep it close, not necessarily play to win, and I think you saw that most reflective in the offensive play calling. Now, look, maybe that's just what this team needs because for the first time in a while, I think I saw some sort of identity out there on offense. They wanted to play ugly, drag Michigan through the mud, keep it close going into the fourth quarter, and have a chance late. Maybe that's the answer because, we're dealing with a really treacherous stretch here that things can get ugly, that the wheels can come off. This team, it'd be really easy for this team to fall apart here in the month of October based on what they're facing. But offensively, you had 7 drives where it was either tied or a 3-point game, and Jeff Grimes just kept running it into that Michigan wall. He never really took advantage or even attempted to take advantage of that stacked box until it was too late. Obviously, there was the deep ball that got intercepted that should have been a pass interference, but a couple plays before that, and this is by the time it already got to a 2-score game, I think you would have liked to seen him start taking those shots before it became a 2-score game because this team's just not built to come back like that on the road. I don't care how much time is left. I think this team needs to play with a lead, and you had 7 drives there where you're kind of just content with, banging your head against the wall.
Yeah, it was very conservative, right? Very conservative offensive play calling, and it kept us in the ball game for a while. Maybe because they didn't know what exactly Hunter Simmons could do out there with his first time really, being in the middle of a game and competing in a game. Not counting Maryland's last drive against Maryland, but also I don't think that we could have held up with enough time to throw the ball besides those quick chipaways, quick game, quick game, quick game, just because of what Michigan's defensive line and defensive pass rush has, right? And so I think that game plan was solid, but eventually you have to make drives. You have to find a way to win the ball game. And I think that's where we kind of had that missing piece. And
Yeah.
I think we all saw that we wanted at least maybe a double move, a max protection deep ball somewhere. You're kind of desperate for a big play at some point. And like you said, it ended up being too late. But they did throw finally a double move with Benny Anthony that we completed, and then the next time we threw a big play attempt was the interception. So after that, it was kind of back to you know the conservative play calling. But
Can you beat a team like Michigan though that way? I mean, that's again where I have the criticism of the game plan. I'm fine with it to a certain extent, but Michigan's the tougher team. They're the more disciplined team. I don't know if you're going to beat them at their own game with this Wisconsin team, and I think even the defensive play calling to me, and I haven't rewatched the game yet, and I was watching from field level, so I might have missed some things. You seem to be in favor of the defensive game plan, and I can't argue too much because I think they, for the most part, did what they had to do. And Bryce Underwood, yeah, he had some big plays that hurt Wisconsin, but he wasn't great. I mean, he wasn't killing them for the most part. But I thought again, you're looking for something. You just never got that one big momentum changing play and never really came close. I would have liked to see him try to get after and make something happen, put this game in your hands rather than hoping Michigan makes a key mistake, which they never really did. I just felt like, on both sides of the ball, they just never really attacked it and tried to steal this one. Because, again, I think you caught Michigan on a really good day where they didn't play their best.
yeah, I agree. I think we didn't take that risk. We were, like you said, kind of playing more to not lose than to win the ball game. And you can't afford to do that with these opponents, playing opponents at this high of a level. Eventually, you have to be the playmaker. You have to go and change the game yourself. And again, being able to finding a way to do that is what I'm excited to see in these next several weeks. Is what do they do in order to make sure that that does happen, to where they can take those risks and be confident in those big plays, those game changing plays. Because there really weren't any. There weren't any game
Yeah.
changing plays. There weren't any big plays. Nothing really popped out from Wisconsin on on film when it comes to what really could have changed the game. But we just hung in there, right? We hung in there, we held on, and that's just not good enough to win these games. But we didn't do anything necessarily out of our realm that shot us in the foot, like you said. So that's a positive, but also there, I mean, it's not good enough, right? And that's where we got to
Mhm.
take that next step.
The other criticism, you probably have something to say about this. The timeouts at the end of the game. It's a 14-point game. Wisconsin gets to a third down after the 2-minute warning. Luke Fickell elects not to use his timeouts. He said something along the lines, he wanted them in his back pocket. They obviously need 2 scores with just over a minute to play. Wanted to conserve them for later if they were able to get that stop. I can kind of see his point. At the same time, getting 14 points with your offense in that short a time seems very questionable at best. Now, this is kind of one where my life experience probably shapes my opinion. I was on the field shooting for us, so you see the highlights rolling on the podcast. So you guys and gals don't have to look at what I've been told is a very punchable face on my part as much, so we can add some cool stuff to this show. So it's 90 degrees. I'm hot. It's fourth quarter. I know the game's over. I'm done. I wanted to get out of there. So it didn't bother me from that perspective. I had enough. I was ready to go find some air conditioning. But if you were in these players' shoes and you saw that move, do you take it some type of way?
I would have. I took it. I did take it some type of way, and I wasn't even
Yeah.
on the field. I think if I had shoulder pads on that sideline, I would have been a little bit more emotional than what I shared on Twitter. I mean, I was pretty calm and from my couch, but the the press the presser um, of what he said in the media just didn't really make sense to me. I mean, yeah, you want to save your timeouts if you get the ball back and if you got that stop, but you didn't get the stop and you still had time to spend the timeouts. It just didn't really make sense to me in order to not still fire off those timeouts. And you want to show that example to your players. Now, you want to talk about competitive spirit, Luke Fickle. I mean, you want to show that competitive spirit with
Right.
kind of just throwing every single haymaker that you can until the clock hits zero. I would have respected that as a player, knowing that my head coach was doing everything possible in order to make sure that we could stay in this game, and we still found a way to at least keep it close. I mean, it'd be nice to win or to. I'd be proud to walk off the field losing by 7 than by 14, even if you got the ball back somehow. And even if we didn't, well, at least we exhausted all timeouts and all options. So it just didn't make sense to me on what his explanation was, and it really kind of pisses me off when you talk about him talking about competitive spirit and not using those timeouts. It's just my personal opinion.
He did this on the other side of the ball too at Alabama, where you got a chance to make it 38-21. I mean, I think there was like 3 minutes left on going into the last drive. You just, ran the ball. At the time, I kind of played it off as, okay, he's trying to get this run game going, find them some success, find them some confidence going into the Big Ten play here.
Yeah,
But now I'm starting to wonder, is this I don't want to go in his head and say it's waving the white flag, because I'd find that hard to believe for any coach at this level that you would just up and quit in the last couple minutes like that. But it is odd, 2 out of 3 weeks here, to kind of see that final drive. Just you'd be like, we're good.
Yeah. It just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, if you're in that situation, I think 9 times out of 10, 10 times out of 10, you use those timeouts. Then what are you saving them for?
Right.
Especially at some point, what are you saving them for as that clock starts to tick down? I mean, I don't know. It
You
doesn't,
know what?
doesn't make
I
sense.
figured it out. I figured it out. It's a Fox Big Noon game. They are ridiculous with the commercials every chance they get. He was doing everybody a favor by by getting the game over with, because they are terrible with all the stoppages. I mean, those games are going 4 hours now with them, and if they could make it five, they would. But moving on to Hunter Simmons here, kind of a surprising move. I know he looked really good in that drive against Maryland, and what did you just make out of them making a quarterback change at this point of the season? I mean, do you? I like I said a couple weeks ago, I had seen too much in fall camp to make me believe that Simmons was going to be the guy. I don't know if he necessarily separated himself from Danny O'Neil, but what did you think about the move and maybe his future here as the backup quarterback, if or the starting quarterback, if Billy Edwards continues to be out with that knee injury?
I think this team is probably getting pretty used to change, constant change. I mean, the O line is constantly changing, right? I mean, and Danny O'Neil, from my understanding, was he said in the media on Monday was he was getting majority of the reps early in the week. Um,
Right.
so I don't really know what's going on from a coaching standpoint, what's going on in that building in order for them to make that change. But I think if you're playing on that team, especially at this point with the record that we have, I would get used to change and being able to adjust and not really have consistency around yourself when it comes to the lineup. But I thought Hunter Simmons did show that he could control a football game. He didn't
Hmm.
he didn't show necessarily that he can make the big plays. But I think he did a great job staying within the game plan. And then you have Danny O'Neil, who will push those boundaries, right? Will take the risks, and you have that pros and cons to both of those, right? So I thought it was a little bit funny putting in Danny O'Neil during the game, though. I mean, it didn't really make sense to me on some third downs. I don't think he's that big of a run threat to where you can put him in there as like a wildcat type of situation. I mean, just put another running
Right.
back in there if you're going to do that. Just didn't really make sense to me to put him in just to specifically run the ball. Kind of takes a little bit of the mojo off of what Hunter Simmons was doing early on. So it was just a little bit funky to me, but I thought Hunter Simmons did a great job staying within the game plan. Now that he has another week under his belt, you want to see these quarterbacks take the next step and improve a lot within the next week. So I hope he's out there next week so that we can see the improvement.
A lot of times with young quarterbacks or first time starters, and I think you see this a lot more in the NFL, but that first drive tends to be scripted. I know you were on the other side of the ball, but how often was that the case in the game? Because I'm going to assume that it was on Saturday.
It's probably about a 99% chance that that drive was
Okay.
scripted. I mean, you have from an offensive standpoint, you have a certain number of plays that's just completely scripted. And then from there, you kind of go off of what's working, what are you feeling, more instincts, more reaction to the defense. But that was definitely scripted, and it was the best drive of the season, 100%. I
Right.
think it juiced every Badger fan up on what that first drive was. Um, but it was for sure scripted. Great
Because
script
that's what
though.
I was thinking. I was thinking in the moment. I'm like, I've seen this a lot of times. I think you saw it in the Bears game the other day, where Caleb Williams just looks phenomenal, and then can't replicate it the rest of the day. But that first drive though was pretty much everything you wanted. 12 plays, 75 yards. You only got to third down once, and the one time you did get to third down, it's a 3rd and 1. You were able to run the ball on 8 of 12 plays. Hunter Simmons is I think 3 of 3 passing or 4 of 4 passing. on the drive. Unfortunately, like you said, never came close to that the rest of the game, but at least it's the first time this season where I feel like you felt like, okay, the Jeff Grimes era, what he wanted, has arrived. This is the type of offense Wisconsin needs to win games. And you know what? It was one drive, and like I said, it never showed up again. But if you can do that against a team like Michigan, I think it does give you some hope going forward. Maybe not so much in October, but for the part of the schedule after that.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and I think the big thing now is being able to translate the good things from this week, right? Translate the good things from this game plan, what worked well, what didn't, and then also having an understanding of how can we take care of the football, how can we make sure we stay in control of the game, and then how can we take that next step to be able to create big plays. Because I'll say from an offensive standpoint, we had one double move, and Joel Klatt said some crazy stat during the game of how I don't know how many attempts, but it was under 10 yards for Hunter
Yeah.
Simmons. So we didn't take any shots, we didn't take any chances. We were again playing to probably not lose the football, and just kind of try to grind this clock out a little bit. So we need to figure out a way to have game changing plays, create game changing plays. Who do you want the ball in? Whose hands do you want the ball in at that point? So that's something that they got to figure out. And Iowa's going to be huge because you're going to have to take care of the football. It's going to be a huge defensive ball game, and that's going to come down to turnovers and special teams. So who do you want to have the ball in their hands at that point?
I don't know if it's worth talking about, especially if Billy Edwards is going to come back here. But do you have a preference between Hunter Simmons and Danny O'Neal? I think it's tough to say because I always hate judging first starts because the defense doesn't know the opposing quarterback. There's no film to go off of. I'm almost positive they probably weren't preparing for Hunter Simmons at all. And looking back at his Southern Illinois tape. So I don't think you ever take away too much from it because I remember, Middle Tennessee, everybody was jumping on the Danny O'Neal over Billy Edwards bandwagon, and it took a lot of these fans 1 week to get off that bandwagon. But did you see something one way or the other if Billy Edwards can't go that you prefer a backup quarterback here?
I think it's really big to see who's going to take care of the football against Iowa. I mean, if history is going to repeat itself with great defense on both sides, you want to be able to have a quarterback that's going to control the game and control the clock and take care of the football. Danny O'Neal is I feel like of a home run hitter. And that's kind of what we were missing in this game versus Michigan. He will risk those shots to try to hit a home run with. But I really liked what Hunter Simmons was doing in order to take care of the football throughout the whole game consistently. And I think that's going to be a major key for a game against Iowa. And then how can you build off of that with him? How can you develop him from this past game versus Michigan going into the next game? I'd rather see that because then you see some consistency and development with what you just had.
Perfect segue because what this team is lacking and what you just talked about, playmakers, somebody to give a spark. Could be offense, could be defense, but they don't have a lot of big splash plays going for them right now. Vinny Anthony, I think, is the guy you look to. 9 catches, 97 yards. I think they've underutilized him this season. I mean, some of the best moments from 2024 were, Braden Locke just throwing air under the football and letting Vinny Anthony run under it and use his speed. Haven't done that a ton this season, and but I want to focus more on the defensive side of the ball because I do think for as well as they've been playing, and I hate doing this because it kind of does remind me of 2021 and sometimes 2019 where you look at the total yards. Obviously, it's not apples to apples here with what you guys were doing, what they were doing, but as good as a defense is as Wisconsin had at times, the knock on them was always like, well, they you need to ask more of them to help the offense by flipping the field, giving them short fields because they can't drive the length of the field, and that's where this defense lacks the most right now. They're just not a high turnover, high takeaway, high sack team that's going to flip games for them. But the secondary, I know some of these plays that Michigan made were, you just tip your cap to those receivers and say, nice in the quarterback, nice throw, nice catch. Not a lot we can do, but this has been happening a lot this season. These 50-50 balls just aren't going Wisconsin's way. As someone who played in the secondary, is there something you're seeing there that's, turning these 50-50 balls into, 80-20 for the opponent?
I think a lot of it is confidence. I mean, because they have been getting worn down game by game, and really since Middle Tennessee, when they started out in that first drive in that first quarter on the edges with what
Mm-hmm.
the pressure that Middle Tennessee was applying with their receivers. It seems like ever since then, the confidence from our corners, you just don't really, you don't feel it, you don't see it, and then it kind of translates to their play. And I don't know what's going on in the meeting rooms, the walkthroughs, the practices. I don't know the corners coach. I don't know who he is and how he coaches, but I mean, Ricardo Hallman, Rico was an All-American 2 years ago, and I'm pretty sure he was a preseason All-American either last year or this year, or even both. And being able to see kind of just the confidence level not really be there, there's something going on that we may not be seeing that's creating this. And I mean, playing corner is about 90% confidence and 10% footwork. I mean, that's what a lot of that is. And when you don't have that, those 50-50 balls can turn to 80-20 real quick.
Something that's always driven me nuts, and I want to ask you because you played in the secondary, and I'm sure you've been taught this. So when I was coming up, I was always taught to play the ball, not the man, and now it feels like it's switched where these secondary guys will never get their head around. What goes into that? Because I mean, I get it if you're trailing, you don't want to lose momentum. You want to make the tackle, be there to close by any means necessary, and the receiver will eventually slow up when he has to play the ball. But if you're in position, why are they teaching you to never look back at the ball? Because it feels universal now, where the DB will keep his eyes glued on the receiver and try and play their eyes, and just get a hand up late. But receivers are so good now where they're manipulating the DBs with their eyes and then doing late hands and all that stuff too.
Right. And I don't know what the rules are necessarily at this point with the Big Ten, but I know the Big Ten was when I was playing, they would come down very strong on if the DBs, whether they turned around for the ball or not, on calling a defense pass interference. So
Right.
basically, if I didn't turn around and try to find the ball, or at least make an attempt to turn around and try to find the ball and just play the man, that's a flag on me, right? So we were taught very firmly to make sure that we could find a way to one, get in phase. If we were beat, I mean, try to get even with the man as best as possible, but then also trying to find a way to just flip and find the ball,
Right.
just as quickly as you can. And sometimes it's just a bang bang play where as soon as you get there, the ball's there. I mean, that is what it is. But if you have time to find the ball, a lot of the times you can turn into big plays, which big plays that Wisconsin needs right now that can, kind of change the game if you can flip and find the ball and end up catching it.
All right, so we'll keep it shorter today. You got a flight to catch. I drove back from Michigan last night, so I'm tired. But big picture Wisconsin right now. We've been down this road before. Felt good coming out of losses against Ohio State 2 years ago, Oregon last year, Penn State last year. It never carried over, and the team, whether it was the next week or down the road, started looking flat. The wheels came off, and disaster eventually struck. Now, to Luke Fickell's credit, and you brought this up, I thought he could have came in to Saturday's press conference and gave his team a somewhat glowing review because in my opinion, and in a lot of opinions, that was the best Wisconsin has played collectively this season, given the circumstances. And it would have been really easy to mail this thing in after what happened against Maryland. He didn't do that. Even got testy with a reporter for asking about Bryce Underwood. I didn't get that, but Riley Mahlman also had a really good quote when I asked him about just building off this performance. He basically said, "We're not good enough to sit here and feel satisfied with ourselves." And a lot of times with these media, especially from the head coach, they're not really talking to us. They're talking to their team through the media. And I like the attitude that he had, even though it differs from mine. I think that is the way they need to continue to look at it. Maybe, in your head or subconsciously feel good about what you did on Saturday, but you need to have this mindset that they're not there yet. They need to keep pushing. And Saturday, even though it was the best you've played, it's not good enough, and that's not where the standard is.
Yeah, I agree with that. Obviously, the standard is to win the ball game at Wisconsin. Um, but from what the adversity has been this season of just not having that breakthrough yet, right? I mean, I think there is a way to communicate with your players that, hey, this is not the standard. We aren't there yet, but there is a breakthrough coming. I need y'all to trust what I am building and what we're doing here, because we are close and we're getting closer, right? I think getting them to believe that, like, we may not be there yet, but we are getting there and we are getting better. So guess what? I'm going to come up and show up this week with a little bit more urgency. I'm going to show up with a little bit more detail because I know that we're getting close. So I think that side of it too, because these players are worn down. I mean, this is a loss to them too, right? I mean, it's not just the fans sitting here looking at a scoreboard. These players are worn down. They're tired of losing. They're sick of losing and not upholding the standard. There's a lot of guys in that locker room that care. And so I think having that sprinkle of encouragement that there is a light that we're building here and we're very close to it. We're just not there yet. Let's just show up and put in the work again, and let's go make this happen. Next Saturday against Iowa in a huge rivalry game. So I I would love to see that side as well. I mean, I know that there's a standard, and Luke Fickle is a very intense coach, and he's a put your head down and work type of guy. But you need to figure out a way to get these players to want to show up again and again and again and again to believe in his game plans.
So it's Iowa week. I go back and forth on this with the rivalry trophy games, and I always feel differently. But do you feel like these rivalry games, especially Iowa, Minnesota, specifically with Wisconsin, in the new era of college football, are they as big as they once were with the transfer portal, NIL? You're building your roster. I know it's not like Wisconsin hasn't always gotten guys from California, New Jersey, Texas, Florida, wherever. But obviously with the portal, recruiting becomes nationwide, from where all these guys are from, and they're obviously not in it for 4 to 5 years, like 90 some percent of the roster used to be. Do they feel as big as they used to you on the outside anymore?
I think to the alum, it's huge. It's still a really big game. It's a big week. I would love to be in that locker room or be around that facility this week just to kind of feel that environment, right? Feel that juice, feel the importance of this game from this era now, because maybe it's not there to this locker room. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the message is from this staff and from what these players show. I know that there are several guys in there that feel just as passionate about it as I do, just because they were around during that time. But you make a good point. I mean, I hope it is to them, because this is historically one of those who's going to fit in the A gap harder, who's gonna fold first, who's going to tap out first type of game. And I hope they feel that this week, and especially with this offense kind of coming back to what Wisconsin was before. It's kind of back to that culture clash of who's got it more, right, and who's got the better
Mm.
culture. They think they're us mentality, right? So I hope that they feel that. Or myself and plenty of other alums, I'm sure you'll be seeing on social media how important this game is to us. But I hope it feels just as important to these players and these coaches.
When you came to Wisconsin in 2019, you obviously weren't a Wisconsin guy. How quickly did you just get immersed into this rivalry?
Well, it's funny because we would have, coaches come talk to the team, or coaches would take us, after our Monday walkthrough, and they would take us either to the corner of the indoor where it was away from the media. You've probably seen that plenty of times, and
Yeah.
they would always have a message. And every week, I took the message seriously. Obviously, when I was there in 2018, not playing yet, but when it came to Iowa, the message was a little bit different. It was a little bit more intense. You could kind of feel the intensity in the room, and it really made you believe that this was going to be a clash, and this was going to be something that you really needed to prep your body, your mind, and spirit for type of game. And that's where I kind of started to feel that this was different than some of the other games, for a lot of reasons. And having that trophy, whenever we would have the trophy, being able to have that every day to see it going out to practice was always important. And all we would talk about is bacon. Give us the bacon. That was kind of the lingo throughout the week. So, the juice is a little bit higher during these type of games, just naturally. And again, I hope it's there this week in that facility.
What was the team's just mentality or thoughts about Iowa? When you guys played them. I mean, from the outside, I think most of the media, kind of described it as a healthy respect. Iowa, Wisconsin were always kind of compared to each other. A lot of people said it was, a mirror, and it was like looking in the mirror. What did you guys just think about Iowa? When you were there.
I mean, it was, yeah, similar to probably what you would expect. We respect Iowa. We respect their program. I mean, it's hard to bash a program that's almost been reflective of what you are, right? So
Yeah.
it's definitely a respectable rivalry. We knew that it was just going to be an absolute battle throughout the whole game. You're basically scrimmaging yourself just for a trophy and for Big Ten play. That's really what it feels like. And you always had those type of players watching film of kind of who you would wanted to play with, or I'm sure guys in the Midwest, guys who they either played with or got recruited with, and there was a lot of connections with that. And so being able to compete with that, it just felt like a kind of like just a local brawl, just around the
Yeah.
corner. And that's kind of um, I think that's pure. That's a pure rivalry, and we enjoyed it. And I think Iowa feels the same way about us. It's a respectable program, but that it's in order to kind of get those juices flowing. You say they think they're us. Well, they're not us. We're different than these guys. We're going to prove it, and you prove it one time a year, and that's on a Saturday, on turf.
Wisconsin, Iowa, under the lights at Camp Randall on Saturday. We'll see if the Badgers can finally get over this hump, this giant wall that they've been staring at for the last 3 years now. I know it's not a ranked game, but obviously a win over that would be huge for a lot of reasons. But before we go, everyone's still kind of talking about Luke Fickell. Is he the guy for the future? This and that. We'll see what happens at the end of the season. I think things could still go a lot of different ways, but if he were to get this win, obviously I think it's fair to say it takes some pressure off him. But is it enough to say, hey, we can go into 2026 with this thing as it is, or would you need more? More proof that things are rolling in the right direction, rather than a win against the Iowa team that let's be real about them this year. They've obviously haven't got what they thought they had at quarterback, and he may be out. And now, for the first time in a while, their defense doesn't look superhuman either.
Yeah, I wouldn't call this a job security type of win for Luke
Okay.
Fickell. I mean, this game is extremely important, and this rivalry is very important. But there's so many important ball games too after this, and I don't think he should feel comfortable just because he beat Iowa. I mean, you still got another trophy you got to get back, right? So I don't think that this necessarily secures something, but it definitely perks your ears up of saying, hey, maybe this team, maybe he can get this team to back to what we want it to be. And I'd leave it at that. But I think that this game is still extremely important, and being able to spark that rhythm, and you need to create a rhythm of winning. I mean, especially when you're kind of down in the dumps like this, if you can have that one win that sparks it, I mean, there's just something about it in the air that can create a little bit of a spinning wheel to create more wins out of that. So it's a very important ball game for a number of reasons.
And I think this would be maybe the biggest win of his tenure. I think you can say 2023 when they went to Illinois. I think Illinois finished 5-7, and I think this is, if he gets it, we'll see how Iowa finishes and what they do. But knowing what we know in this moment, I think it's safe to say this would be the biggest win since he's been at Wisconsin.
Yeah, and Iowa's still a very good team.
Right.
They had Indiana on the ropes a few weeks ago. I mean, this Iowa team can never be necessarily played down. I mean, they're going to be a solid team every single year where they can sneak up and beat you or absolutely whoop your ass and rush for 300 yards. We've been there before. So being able to avoid that and really respect what they do is going to be a key to be able to play at a high level.
All right, Colin, we'll let you catch your flight. We'll be back after Wisconsin takes on Iowa at Camp Randall Stadium on Saturday.
All right, Evan. I appreciate it. Looking forward to it.